start here. You'll see that popping up. We're happy to have you here and to think about ways that we can help encourage and support your learning and growth. For those of you who are new to me, I was delighted to see some new names signed up and watching this later. My name is Celina Pierman, and I'm a workplace psychologist right here in Central Iowa, and delighted to support and encourage you any way that I can as we pursue this earning a living and life together in organizations. A little bit about my background, just if you're getting to know me today. And I'm going to do it by alphabet soup at the end of my name, not because of just that credential, but what the meaning is for me. My PhD is in psychology. My specialty has been workplace behavior. So for the last 15 years, I've got to experience being a business owner, spending my time in all different types of organizations, 1 to 2, sometimes a day, learning, listening, and leading conversations about how we do this work life better. The SHRM SCP represents my last 30 years, and 15 of that being what I just mentioned, in HR and learning about how do we take great care of people as we pursue our goals, as we take care of each other in this organizational life. So for me, that represents a body of knowledge and experience in, again, different types of questions in listening and learning about how we maximize our performance with our people, not in spite of them. That CSP is a new award that I was granted this year that recognized me as a speaker at the national level and is recognized by a Global Speakers Federation as well, as a distinction of trying to do this work even better as we communicate it out and provide options for you so that we can all learn together. This afternoon, I'll just briefly introduce you to the rest of our team with, I'm kind of excited, some updates. We are the Pierman Group. Our LLC is Meridian People Development, which some of you may have heard of, doing business as the Pierman Group. We have now launched a second company called Chameleon Learning Systems. This little chameleon and I just continue to have a good dance. And so CLS is a new project for us, where now we will be expanding as a team. I'll share with you a little bit about that as we go on through this session this afternoon. So we're adding a few more team members this fall, which we are super excited to do. But regardless of the team or the effort in either of those organizations, which is really just one at the end of the day, we continue to endeavor helping people learn so organizations can improve. Which leads us to the discussion today. So my specialty has been how we put all these personalities, characteristics, and traits in people and try to get some work done. Take care of the customer we've committed to, the patient or the resident we have focused on to be able to do our best work. Whatever that work looks like for you, we're continuing to find ways to do this better. Our approach has been an evidence-based approach, looking at the data, looking at the literature. What do the studies say? And then I often say, adding a sense of humor, our programs continue to be aimed at being scalable so that whether you have 2 employees or 15,000 employees, we have approaches that will help support learning in your organization. And our commitment is dynamic. It has to change with the changing times. And probably one of my passions as we dig into this material for today is this conversation continues to adjust. So our role has been providing programs live on site to small groups or large audiences, of course, delivering through the option of virtual and a new on-demand online course system, which will help bring content to people when and where they need it. When we think about this content for today, it really is wrapped around the competencies that we base curriculum off of, whether it's live on site, whether it's virtual, or it's online on demand. While these are noted as leadership competencies, we really take the approach that we need to build leadership capacity at all levels within organizations. So if you ask me, what are the areas we spend most of our time on? It is these core competencies, whether you're an individual contributor, a people leader, a project leader, a technical or subject matter leader, And then we work on the skills that help support the behaviors that carry this on and develop those aptitudes in order to drive performance. And you'll note today's topic is really a combination of these as we look at strategy, empathy, engagement, with a twist of retention in there. So as you explore what we do a little bit more and the way we like to be able to support and walk alongside organizations to make an impact, this is what we map off of. So for our programs, we have it tied back to what are the core competencies we're working on and how does that map out, whether the curriculum is 30 minutes long or 16 hours long. What I want you thinking about today as we look at this topic is what shaped how you learned to be empathetic. Now, I actually asked this question to someone this morning and he said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I haven't learned that yet. Well, it is a process. Consider for just a moment what shaped your careabouts. And the reason I ask that is we explore this idea of empathy as a strategy for engagement and retention is what is empathy and what does it mean for us? Now, this is a way that I would frame that conversation. If you picture where you learned this from or who influenced it the most or how we're continuing to learn it, because I'm convinced we're never just all the way there. What had some of the biggest influence on your growing up? I will share with you, this did for me, right? Now, somehow when I pictured this adult life and making a living and coming together in organizations, this is what I pictured. This is what I thought it would be like, that somehow this cast of characters would just all get along. And I hope for just a moment there, you might have laughed out loud. But it reminds me all the time that different influences shape how we show up at work. Things we value shape where we show empathy, things that we can connect with. Now, I admit I ran into a few more of these creatures than I ever expected in this adult life. Maybe Grumpy the cat and Oscar the Grouch is someone you're identifying with this afternoon. But if we think about empathy and our ability to extend consideration to someone else, it is absolutely shaped by many, many things before we even got to work. So as we think about intention and stories, I want to start with a moment around my intention is good, so I tell a story that hopefully will produce a positive outcome. But if my intention is not good and I tell a story, the outcome may go negative. Let me give you an example. There is a difference between venting and stirring the pot. I can go to you and say, you just wouldn't believe what happened to me this morning. And you can look at me and say, Celina, what do you need? And I say, just need to vent it. My intention is good. I need to figure this out. But the story continues as long as over and over if we keep telling it. And if my intention is good and I vent it to you and I get it out of my system and I come back and say, you know what? I own that story. Here's what I need to do. I'm going to see a more positive outcome. And yet, if I vent to you and 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 I keep telling the story, the emotion continues as long as I tell the story. Thus, it's going to impact the outcome. That's a pretty big idea that may take some peeling back of layers as we get started with this. But here's why I want you to think about it. All of our stories come from somewhere. And I was having a conversation with a younger manufacturing supervisor this morning who I have known since he was a high-spirited individual contributor who then has become a lead and a supervisor. And we were taking on this story this morning. And he said, I just don't understand. I don't understand somebody else's story. I don't know how to be empathetic with that because it's just not something I've done. It's not something that is a value of mine. Consider for a moment today, when you have good intentions and you hear other people's stories, it's going to shape the outcome of what comes next. at least trying to see it from another perspective, at least giving it some energy to see it from their perspective shapes the stories we continue to tell. If we pair that with all of us have story, right? Have a story behind us, but I would even argue we all have multiple stories. And so one of the patterns that I'm seeing within leaders and organizations today is absolutely filtered through how we learned to give consideration to somebody else, right? Those stories of who we are, where we grew up, the people that influenced us, the cartoons or TV shows I just pointed out a minute ago, how they shape the way we grant consideration to somebody else. Now, this is not a new idea, but my hope in just sharing this with you today is it might raise it back to top of the brain to say, how are my stories shaping my ability to be empathetic with my team? Let me give you an example here for a moment. So I'm going to share some of my pictures. You pick your own pictures. I just happen to have the controls on this one, right? I can tell you stories that have shaped my role as a professional and how I see the workplace and where I assign values I hold to other people around me, right? Those values absolutely shape work ethic and sense of responsibility and a commitment to doing good work. They also are shaped from where I grew up and who I grew up around, right? This is actually a picture of me in preschool, evidently conducting my first group training session. And by the way, that's a Winnie the Pooh shirt and red slacks. So evidently red slacks were in that year. But when I think about those stories, right, that we grew up with, the values that were instilled in us and how they come to us as adults, who's in our life? Who do we spend time with? What do we spend time doing? Who is it that we have cared for? What do we do to refuel us? Who loves us? Who spends time with us? And what are those life experiences that will forever shape us? Empathy, when you look at the body of research on it, has so much to tell us about who we are and what we value. Our challenge for today, though, I can take that life stuff and bring it to work. Each of us have to choose how we show up in it. And that's where I want us to focus our time and effort for today. So consider for a moment how our stories shape our perspective on empathy. Let me give you an example. That same manufacturing supervisor that I was speaking to this morning said to me, Celina, I just don't get it. I don't understand why I have to care about what happens to someone in their personal lives. And he gave a couple of examples, and two of which I'm going to use for a little bit of compare and contrast. He said to me, I just don't care if their pet hamster died. It's not my thing, it's their thing. And I said, that's it. It's their thing. And some of us share widely and some of us don't disclose. But our stories that bring us to this space in the workplace absolutely shape how we extend empathy to someone else. This leader also said to me, well, so this person on my team, her sister died, and I just don't even know what to say. I don't know what to do. They said we need to do something, but I just don't get it. It's her sister, right? And this is a good, caring leader who wants really good things for his team. But it was in a moment of frustration that he said, I just don't know what to do, right? And I said, where do you think that comes from? He goes, I'm not very close to my family and I haven't talked to my sister in years. Our stories shape our perspective on empathy. And when we step into that leadership role, we have to own our stories and understand that our stories are not everybody else's stories. Our value set is not everybody else's value set. So our challenge as a company in creating empathy as a strategy is understanding that for us to produce business results, we have to take care of people. And when people show up at work, the whole person comes into work. Now, we can have policies and we can have practices and we can decide as a company our value set here. But as leaders, when we step into that role, that is what we represent. So for the next few moments, I want you to think about goals for this session. Maybe your goal is just simply to increase your understanding of what empathy is or is not. Maybe today it's to recognize empathy as a key relationship builder, identify empathy as a critical leadership skill, and or apply it to where you influence. When I work within organizations and look at the challenges we have right now around engagement and retention, I always start out noting that people will stay where people are cared about. People will stay where people are cared about. Because when we have choices about where we spend this 35, 40, 45% of our adult life at work, it's about connection, and connection is about relationships. So if we break this down by portions of topic, let's start with strategy. I suggested to you on the description that you signed up under today that empathy is a strategy. So let's start with strategy and break down the rest. Strategy is deciding where to go and the means to get there. It is a declaration of intent. We set strategies on behalf of a company. So that then creates a set of goal-directed actions an organization takes to gain and sustain superior performance relative to whoever it is that you compete against. Now, whether that is profit or nonprofit, small or large, publicly owned, privately owned, publicly traded, right? Government, all of the different types of organizations have to decide how they provide a service and solve a problem. If we're not solving a problem for whoever our end user is, customer, patient, whoever that is for you, we don't exist. So the bottom line is to get results through performance, which is really the effective sum of all parts to produce or deliver on whatever we have committed to. Strategy is that declaration of intent. We see that at the corporate level or the organizational level. We can take that to the department and the team, but it is also one of the arguments we're making for leadership today to decide a declaration of intent. How will we take care of people? And what is it going to take next in order to do that better? All of the organizations I see, I've got some companies that are doing this well and want to up their game. I also have some organizations been a little slow to look at this, but yet they're trying, and they're trying to figure out what that right mix is. Because as we'll explore in just a moment, it's not being all things to all people. It's doing what fits for your business and matches to the people who you want to help you drive that performance. We also see that there will be organizations out there that don't want a good people strategy, or maybe struggle to put one in place, or it's not important to them. They will have other outcomes. So when we think about strategy, it's that declaration of intent. When we talk about strategic leadership, it really comes back to effective leadership. Leadership still matters. Leadership today is about meeting people where they're at and taking them with you. And we know that when leadership is done well, it absolutely impacts financial performance of an organization, customer service, organizational culture, the ability to adapt to change, innovation and creativity, employee performance and productivity, employee engagement and retention. Effective leadership matters. And yeah, what we find, all of these came out of particular research on what makes an impact in organizations, and when they identified effective leadership, what is that impact on? And yeah, what we also know is that 90% of us who moved into a formal people role were unprepared. 70% of us still report that we were surprised about what was included in the role. We still also hear, though, that 61% of employees say that managers aren't offering enough feedback, and only 9% of us say we're thriving at work. Leadership is one of those key pieces of this puzzle to say, for an organizational to be effective, it's the people that drive it, and how we identify leaders, people leaders, technical leaders, project leaders, and build leadership at all levels absolutely will drive how we do this as an organization. Yet things have changed. We are putting more emphasis on this these days so that we know as people drive performance, some people will say to me, Celina, I just don't understand why we have to deal with all this people stuff. Here's what I know. 60, 70, 80% of our operating costs are usually people, which then gives us not only our people case, but our business case. Because if we're not taking good care of people, there's a cost to that, but there's a cost not to do that. If we are taking good care of people, there's a cost in time and energy and likely some resources, but there's a cost not to. Within our organizations, we just need to decide what cost are we willing to spend. So let's break this down. If strategy is a declaration of intent and effective leadership still matters for organizational results, where does empathy tie into this? Let's start with a contrast between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is typically defined by feelings of pity for another person without really understanding what it's like to be in their situation. Now, sympathy or sympathy cards or extensions of sympathy absolutely can be genuine and well-intended, but it is more of I feel sorry for you. When we look at the research on it, it distinguishes between sympathy and empathy. Empathy refers to the capacity or the ability to imagine yourself in the situation of someone else, experiencing the emotions, ideas, or opinions of that person. We certainly see this in some of my opening examples of life events, that somebody has a different value set and something else means more to them, and I just don't understand it, but I'm willing to acknowledge that I see it's important to them. But this also comes up at work all the time. I see it between shifts, between departments, anywhere there's a handoff or a transition. I see this between the office and the production floor, one location to another location, on-site versus hybrid or remote. How can we see it from somebody else's perspective? If we can continue to say, what would that be like, and be able to increase our awareness of what are they experiencing, what are their ideas, or what are those opinions, I am going to see this situation differently. One lesser known piece on empathy is that there are multiple types. I picked 3 for today, just to bring these to maybe renewed awareness or for the first time, that there are actually different types of empathy and how they apply for our purpose today at work. Number 1 is cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is the emotional capacity to understand what another person might be thinking or feeling without involving emotional engagement or support. That I am not emotionally tied in, but I can understand what they're thinking or feeling. It's a cognitive process, right? That's our brain working on this. I get that. It's exactly what this manufacturing supervisor said to me this morning. He says, I get that. It's just not my thing. Yeah, not your thing. It's their thing. Now, this also can be used. It's probably a whole different class on how this can be used actually for not so good. So I always bring it back in our leadership classes. I always want you leading for good, not evil, right? So this can be used with some punitive ways that we just want to acknowledge and not do today. Number 2, emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is the ability to sense and share the feelings of another person. This type of empathy changes the person experiencing it. So when it's utilized in a healthy way, emotional empathy is a great way to bond with your coworkers or to realize that your manager is, in fact, a human. So we're able to understand not only the process of what's going on, but the feeling that's involved in it. And it is a connector. It is a connector. Now, here's what's different. Number 3, compassionate empathy. Compassionate empathy is the most active form of empathy. This empathy involves feeling concerned or reaching out with an offer to help. Compassion is action. And when we look at the literature and the research on compassion, it is empathy lived. It is empathy. I understand that's your feeling, but what do I do now? What is the action, if required, to let you know or offer help or ideas to improve or at least understand it from where we're at? Empathy in the workplace, when we look at the research on this, when we demonstrate care and concern for somebody else and are willing to see it from their perspective, it builds trust and rapport. It enhances communication. It boosts morale, fosters engagement, supports well-being, reduces turnover, enhances innovation and creativity. It promotes inclusivity. It improves conflict resolution. And it sets an example for others. 60, 70, 80% of our operating costs in most organizations is people. So when we think about how do we show up as humans in this, it is so tempting to go, and I've heard this from clients of mine, well, Celina, I can't give them everything. And I hear this pendulum swing going of, you know what? If I give them everything, then they'll want everything. And I'm like, okay, so what fits for your business model? Because within every organization, we have to decide how this gets done here. And if you're in a role where you're thinking, Celina, I'm not the one deciding that, you need to talk to everybody else. Well, I can record this for you and send it to you, but it's beyond that, right? It is understanding what can I do in the space I'm in? What can I do to understand and select empathy as a strategy to form and reform meaningful relationships, to provide that connection so people stay, so people want to work on stuff, right? All of the things on this list are outcomes of showing up for other people and walking alongside them. It doesn't mean we have to give every resource to everybody. And then usually I'll hear a pushback of, Celina, I give them an inch, they take a mile. I give them this, and I'm like, tell me more about that. Because when we bring that story back, right? When we tell that story and we get spun up on it, it doesn't help the actions we take next. We get stuck in that story. So how could we see that we are literally rebuilding workplace models as we speak? We are understanding that the workplace relationship has changed and that the whole person comes into the workplace. And yet, while we don't all need the same amounts of it, being heard and being understood and being supported actually drives performance. When we add to that, it really becomes a care about issue. That empathy has to be greater than apathy. And a lot of times when I hear from leaders who are just like, I can't do it all, it really comes out of a point of exhaustion or not caring. Apathy, by definition, is a lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern. We still have work to do. There's outcomes to get to. There's procedures that need to be followed. There's compliance that needs to be happen. There are job tasks that have to be done. And yet when we do it by building relationships and making relationships stronger and show a little bit more interest, a little bit more enthusiasm, and a little bit more concern, we now understand that people will perform better. So out of all the things out there, where do we start? There's a favorite coaching technique of mine that says this. I want you to name the 5 key relationships you count on to be successful in your role. If you think about those 5 relationships, what are you doing to invest in those? Maybe that's a once-a-year check-in. Maybe that's a once-a-week check-in. Maybe that's a monthly lunch or quarterly meeting. The idea is that relationships, of healthy, effective relationships, don't just happen. So where do we start? We're like, Celina, I got a to-do list already. I don't need more to do. I want you to think about a little bit more investment in the relationship actually helps save you some time later. So number 1, when we want to intentionally practice more empathy, check in on team members more often. Whether it is in the same building, across buildings, across locations, virtually or face-to-face, we are seeing the need for more check-ins. This is going to relate a whole lot to our September webinar, where we actually have a report out from the U.S. Surgeon General who says and has done the work behind it, the research is out, that office has come out with the conclusion that loneliness has increased significantly. And checking in on people is part of our role as a leader, our role as a coworker, to say, how are you doing? Now, it's not just the loneliness factor, it's the social connection. It's building relationships. And as leaders, we need to model this better. So checking in on team members often, not from a micromanagement standpoint, but a, hey, how you doing? What are you running into we didn't expect? How can I help? Showing interest in the hopes and needs of your team and team members also is a great way to choose an empathetic approach. Showing interest. It may not be your value set that's how they spend their time. It may not be your thing that you do that you like, but it's theirs. People stay where people are cared about. Number 3, demonstrating a willingness to help an employee by listening while keeping lines of communication open so they do feel more comfortable sharing when it's necessary. Not everybody wants to share, but when they do, we need to be fully present and listening. Being empathetic means being a good, active listener. Number 4, demonstrating compassion. So when others disclose a personal loss or struggle, letting them know that they are supported, even if we have not walked that. Compassion is the action. It might be a note, a card, some sort of action to say, thank you for telling me. I know this is important to you. Is there anything that I can do to help? Now, of course, there are many ways to choose empathy as an approach to the way we lead our teams. If you're looking for a first one, start with one. Start simply. Tell your team, I just haven't taken enough time lately. I want to put more emphasis on connecting with each of you. Nothing's wrong. I just want to make sure I'm doing the best I can do to help this team. If you haven't been doing it for a while, or maybe you've been feeling overloaded, switching gears and doing it more may not only kind of freak out your team a little bit, so give them a little heads up, but it also helps us feel better. Empathy drives engagement. So engagement, by definition, is discretionary effort. So when people feel cared about, their sense of value to the organization and the team goes up. Their sense of belonging is reaffirmed. They are more psychologically safe. There's some great information out there. We do a program on psychological safety where if I feel included and I feel safe to learn and safe to contribute and safe to give you feedback, I'm going to do better work. Empathy drives engagement by building trust and loyalty. It improves communication. It reduces stress and burnout. It increases support and recognition. It gives us increased job satisfaction and enhanced work-life balance. Wouldn't it be amazing? Is it when an employee can choose to give us a little something more, that they have a little more capacity in their day-to-day to go, I feel like I belong. I feel like I can contribute. I feel like I know what I need to do. These items, right, were built and fueled by clear expectations, being present to people, and telling them and showing them that they matter. There are some considerations with this. We are busting some employment models that have been around a long time. So we have about 125 years is more or less of modern business history, and different models have served different purposes along the way. But as we rewrite what organizations will look like going forward, there are more considerations we need to give to what does this employment relationship look like. We are also just seeing within our communities, within where we are and how employees are getting to us, there are just more barriers to employment. We see this through childcare, access to transportation, being able to set a healthcare appointment outside of work hours, right? We have this combination going between some things are more accessible and some things are less accessible. So recognizing that this does depend on where you're at and what your area looks like. What I am finding is that as those challenges become deeper and wider, the call and the need for empathy is even greater. Maybe today, a guiding question that you can take is, what is the simplest action? What is the thing I could do right now to make a bigger impact for the people I'm around? Is it your next meeting? Is it your next email? Is it your next phone call? Is it your next one-on-one with an employee who simply just needs to be heard? I really believe that there's so much opportunity for us to talk about why this is important and expect that leaders will model teamwork. Let me give you an example. It's not unusual for me to get a phone call that says something like this. You know what? There's too much drama. Employees have got too much drama going on. Come fix that. Well, that's a different story, but I will always ask to see the senior team first. I want to see the team members of the leadership team and how they're treating each other. True story. I went into an organization not too long ago. 8 people were supposed to be in that meeting. 2 didn't even show up because they didn't think it applied to them. And 2 others weren't even talking to each other. And I said, you know what? We're not going to demonstrate to others how to be good team members unless we're doing it to each other. So when we think about that with, let me go back to that, actively reviewing policy and process, we have some updating to do to employee handbooks and processes about how we understand the challenges our workforce has and what are our negotiables or non-negotiables. We can support a learning culture, understand that in our business, there are borders and boundaries. We can't be all things to all people. But what are the opportunities we have to provide connection? When we send out the link to this, as you signed up for today or you're watching the recording later, I have a worksheet we're going to attach with that you can use as a conversation piece in your team to ask some questions about where are we working at this well and what other areas do we need to consider? Because all relationships take effort. The healthiest ones take the most effort. And effectiveness in our organizations is really all about the relationship. We need to continue to meet people where they're at, not where we expect them to be. And in the words of my dear friend Danielle, we are all one conversation away from a whole new understanding. It is taking the time to see it from another perspective. Let's give that a short business case. One of the things that I'm most interested in organizations is handoff and transitions. And what we've seen in what we'll call a walk a mile in my shoes program is a walk a mile in my shoes program would be some sort of job sharing, job observation that happens in a planned effort. So if I sign up to go visit your department for an hour to learn something about your department in as little as an hour, my perspective already changes. There's so many good examples across organizations that if I just knew a little bit more about that, it would judge a little less, help a little more. And that's really what we want to think about from today is, what is it in your scope of work that you want to do better? Is there somebody who you've not been giving much attention or support to lately that you need to circle back to that and offer a little bit more? What I know, especially when we're tired and risking burnout, is that ability to share something, support someone else, and help them through a difficult spot actually helps rejuvenate us too. So as we bring this to a wrap today, here's what I want you to consider. Empathy is not a new topic. Taking care of people in organizations is something that we've learned some things about in the recent years. The question is, what do we do next with this? What would be the next relationship you want to put some attention to? Is there somebody on your team that's struggling and just needs to be heard? What are the programs or processes that we as an employer need to talk about as a leadership team? Not because we're soft, but we understand that people taken care of will drive better performance. So when we think about this today and your investment of time, I want to share with you a new opportunity that we have. If you are interested You have a QR code here. This will also be in the send out after the, you can also go to talk.ac.dr/Dr. Celina. This is the code that will get you a download that will share with us our new endeavor, and everybody who's chosen to invest some time in us today and letting me work on some material with you and share some thoughts with you today. You will have access to our new learning management system with free options in there for you. If you are in HR, if you add HR to the end of that code, if that is your thing, we have an HR mentor network free available in there as well with HR resources. So you can decide you want to be in HR or not in HR today if you decide to sign up. If you use that code and give us some feedback, there's a download that comes with that, giving you instructions on how to log in and join us in the conversation there. If that's not your jam, it's okay. Skip this part. And hopefully, as you get the recording and the worksheet, take the conversation the next step. Because one of the things that we have in front of us is the opportunity to keep learning. So whether it was something I said today, something you agreed with or didn't agree with it, my job and this work is the opportunity to help stir up the conversation so that you can go back within your team of teams and say, where are we doing well and what do we need to work on? Because all of us continue to have something to learn and something to offer. I want you confident in what you know and humble enough to know we still got a long way to go. Thank you all for joining in today. I wish you all the best. Stay in touch.